When I first learned about the 1892 murder of 17-year-old Freda Ward by her ex-fiancée, 19-year-old Alice Mitchell, I was riding a New York City subway on my long commute home from graduate school. I remember it well because I was so engrossed in the act of imagining their lives, I missed my stop, and then 3 more. I'd been reading a scholarly article about the case, but I kept losing Alice and Freda in the academic talk of identity politics and American modernity, and so I'd closed my eyes and tried to hear their voices through the dense text, to visualize their story. But I had little more than a train ride for such reveries. I was already a year into research on citizenship, and I was determined to be the kind of historian who focused on law, not love. Nevertheless, I slowly started collecting newspaper articles about the Mitchell-Ward case, struck by their sensational headlines and front-page placement, and intrigued by the physical evidence they mentioned. Love letters, a bottle of poison, a father's razor. After I graduated, I worked as a research curator in the exhibitions department at the New York Public Library. With my personal collection of Alice and Freda materials growing and my experience in public engagement deepening, I began to picture different ways of sharing their story. I longed to tell it on the page, as a nonfiction narrative, not a study, accompanied by the kind of stirring visuals an exhibition case offered. I imagined a book that was both written and curated. I wanted readers to see my research, to explore the archival mix, connect with the material, and draw their own conclusions. 6 years after I missed my subway stop, I found myself walking through Elmwood Cemetery, led by Vincent Astor, a local historian in Memphis, Tennessee. I was, at this point, thoroughly consumed by the sad tale of Alice and Freda. The closer we got to their graves, the heavier my body felt. I reminded myself, as I always do when approaching that very last folder in an archive, you already know how the story ends. But the truth is, you never really know. Just then, as I was gingerly sidestepping graves, Vincent paused for a moment and turned to me. "If you're remembering their names and telling their stories," he said in a gliding, southern drawl, "they won't mind if you're stepping on their toes." In this book, I hope to have done just that. Alice and Freda's names, once well known across America, are now recognized by only a small group of people, and yet their tragic story will feel familiar. They were teenagers in love, and they planned to spend the rest of their lives together. Their relationship, plagued by issues of jealousy and infidelity from the very beginning, was fraught in no small part because it was illicit. In 1892 Memphis, few people had heard of same-sex love, and even fewer believed it was anything less than perverse. And from the moment the romantic nature of Alice and Freda's relationship was discovered, that was all they heard. It was wrong. It was unnatural. It was impossible. It was forbidden. There is a good deal of fault to be found in both Alice and Freda, most clearly, of course, in Alice's unconscionable act of violence. But 2 women loving each other and wanting to make a home and a life together is not one of them. And yet, when Freda was 6 feet underground and Alice behind bars, it was Alice's motivation, love and not the bloody murder, that was said to be insane. Alice was driven mad by a perverse passion, medical experts would testify. Their observations were recycled time and time again. More than 120 years later, today's listeners will find much of that world is sadly familiar to us. While I offer historical context, this is very much about Alice and Freda's short-lived romance. To tell that story, with so few primary sources and even fewer trustworthy ones among them, I have strained to hear their voices in the archives, newspapers, medical journals, school catalogs, courtroom proceedings, and of course, their love letters. When there was agreement among sources, I made note of it and gave those quotations priority. From the very beginning, I noticed obvious fabrications driven by various agendas, and I wrote that in too. In order to bring the listener closer to historical actors, to hear their voices, I pulled dialogue from courtroom testimony and newspaper articles, illuminating intimate moments and, in darkly funny turns, imagining how the faulty reasoning of some of our historical actors leads to absurd conclusions.